Molly's small fingers appeared under the basement door at 3 in the morning, pushing a folded piece of paper into the darkness. I crawled across the cold concrete and opened it beneath the fading beam of my flashlight. The words were written in purple crayon, shaky but clear. "Grandpa, don't drink the tea. Daddy told me a secret before he fell. I think Mommy pushed him. I am 74 years old. And I just discovered my son was murdered." My hands trembled so violently that the paper nearly slipped from my fingers. I read the words again, then a third time, as if repetition might change their meaning, but the purple letters remained the same, each one carved into the page with the desperate pressure of a child who knew she was doing something dangerous. I pressed my palm against the gap beneath the door, hoping to feel her warmth on the other side, but she was already gone, her small footsteps retreating up the creaking stairs like a ghost returning to the world of the living. The basement of Beacon Point Lighthouse had been my prison for 60 days. 60 mornings of waking up on a thin mattress that smelled of mildew and regret. 60 afternoons of staring at the single high window, watching the fog roll in from the Atlantic like a shroud. 60 nights of listening to the footsteps above me, wondering if this would be the night Miriam decided I had outlived my usefulness. She had been methodical in her cruelty, my daughter-in-law. She did not throw me down here in a fit of rage. No, Miriam Callahan was far too patient for such obvious villainy. She built my cage one brick at a time, starting with whispered concerns to neighbors about my memory, then progressing to tearful phone calls with doctors about my confusion, and finally arriving at the inevitable conclusion that poor old Jean simply could not be trusted to live upstairs anymore. The dementia diagnosis came from a doctor I had never met, based on symptoms I had never shown. But by then, Miriam had already planted the seeds of doubt in everyone who might have believed me. I looked at the note again, tracing the purple letters with my finger. The crayon had been pressed so hard that it left grooves in the paper. I imagined Molly sneaking down in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, her small hands shaking as she slid the note through the gap. She was braver than I had ever been. The memory of Tom's death crashed over me like a rogue wave. 2 years ago, on a night when the fog was thick enough to swallow ships, my son had fallen from the lantern room at the top of the lighthouse. That was what Miriam told me. That was what Sheriff Cooper wrote in his report. Tom had gone up to check the light during a storm, lost his footing on the wet iron steps, and plunged 89 feet to the rocks below. I had believed her. God help me, I had believed every word. I had stood at his funeral and held Miriam's hand while she wept tears that I now knew were as fake as her love for my son. She killed him. The words echoed in my skull like the tolling of a bell. She killed my boy. And then she started killing me. The tea. Always the tea. Earl Grey, she told me, with a touch of honey for my throat. I had drunk it without question for weeks, grateful for any kindness in my concrete cell. I had not noticed the bitter undertone beneath the bergamot. I had not connected the tea to the fog that clouded my thoughts, or the heaviness that dragged at my limbs. But Molly had noticed. My 10-year-old granddaughter had seen what I had been too drugged to recognize. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the light steps of a child, but the deliberate click of heels on wood. The doorknob rattled, and a key scraped in the lock. I shoved Molly's note under my mattress and arranged my face into the slack expression of a man who had given up on everything. The door swung open. Miriam stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the morning light like an angel of death in a designer dress. In her hands was a ceramic mug, steam rising from its surface. "Good morning, Jean," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I brought your tea." She descended slowly, her eyes never leaving my face. I wondered if she was looking for signs of clarity, for any indication that the fog in my mind had begun to lift. I kept my expression empty, my hands limp in my lap. "Here you go." She pressed the warm mug into my palms. "Drink up. It will help you feel better." I raised the mug to my lips and inhaled the familiar scent of bergamot and honey. Beneath it, so faint that I would have missed it before, was something chemical and wrong. Thank you, Miriam, I mumbled, letting my words slur. You take such good care of me. She smiled. It was the smile of a woman who believed she had already won. Of course I do, Jean. That is what family is for. She turned and climbed the stairs, leaving me alone with the poison in my hands. I waited until I heard the door lock behind her, until her footsteps faded into the distance. Then I carried the mug to the corner where a crack in the foundation leaked water during heavy rains. I poured the tea into the earth and watched it disappear. 50 years I had kept this lighthouse burning. 50 years I had watched for danger on the horizon, guiding ships safely through the darkness. I had saved 17 lives from these waters. I had raised my son to love this tower as much as I did. Now my son was dead. His killer slept in his bed. And his daughter had just risked everything to save me with a note written in purple crayon. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my pocket, close to my heart. Molly had handed me a lifeline. Now, I had to figure out how to climb it before Miriam realized her poison had stopped working. The lighthouse had stood for 177 years. It had survived hurricanes and wars and the relentless pounding of the Atlantic. Tonight, buried in its foundation, I made a silent vow. I would survive this too. And I would make sure my son's killer paid for what she had done. I still remember the first night I climbed those 89 steps to the lantern room. I was 24 years old, fresh from the Coast Guard Academy, with salt in my blood and dreams of the sea in my heart. The previous keeper, old Henry Marsh, had handed me the keys with hands that shook from 50 years of Atlantic winters. The light does not care about your problems, he told me. It does not care if you are tired or sick or heartbroken. It only asks one thing of you, Eugene. Keep it burning. I made that promise standing in the shadow of Beacon Point Lighthouse, and I kept it for half a century. The tower was built in 1847, when this stretch of Maine coast was known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Ships would founder on the hidden rocks, their hulls splitting open like rotten fruit. Their crews swallowed by waters so cold that a man would be dead before he could scream for help. The lighthouse was erected to save them, a 90-foot column of granite and iron topped with a Fresnel lens that could throw its beam 20 miles out to sea. I learned every inch of that tower in my first year. I learned which steps creaked in the cold and which ones grew slick with condensation when the fog rolled in. I learned to read the weather in the color of the sunset and predict storms by the way the seabirds gathered on the rocks. I learned that a lighthouse keeper's job was not just to maintain a machine, but to stand watch over an entire coastline of souls who did not even know they were being protected. It was lonely work, but I never minded the solitude. The sea was my companion, and the light was my purpose. I would climb those 89 steps every evening at dusk, check the oil levels and clean the lens, and then stand at the gallery rail watching the beam sweep across the darkness. In those moments, I felt like I was holding back the night itself. Margaret changed everything. She came to Beacon Point in the summer of 1970, a school teacher from Portland who had rented a cottage for the season. I saw her for the first time at the general store, arguing with old Mr. Patterson about the price of blueberries. She had red hair that caught the sunlight like copper wire and a laugh that could be heard 3 streets away. I was not a man who believed in love at first sight, but I believed in it by the time she finished telling Patterson exactly what she thought of his blueberry prices. We were married the following spring, in the small chapel overlooking the harbor. She wore her mother's dress and carried wildflowers she had picked from the cliffs that morning. I wore my dress uniform and tried not to cry when she said her vows. Margaret moved into the keeper's cottage without complaint. She learned to live with the fog and the isolation, with the sound of the foghorn that could shake dishes off the shelves, with a husband who disappeared up the tower stairs every evening and did not return until dawn. She planted a garden of wild roses and sea lavender around the base of the lighthouse, and she told me that every flower was a prayer for the sailors we could not see. Tom was born 2 years later, in the bedroom that overlooked the Atlantic. The doctor almost did not make it in time because a nor'easter had closed the roads. I delivered my own son by the light of a kerosene lamp while the lighthouse beams swept past the window every 4 seconds. He had his mother's eyes and my stubborn chin. From the moment he could walk, he wanted to climb the tower. I would carry him on my shoulders up those 89 steps, and he would press his small hands against the glass of the lantern room, watching the lights spin with an expression of pure wonder. "Daddy," he asked me once, when he was 5 years old, "why do we keep the light burning?" I knelt down so I could look him in the eyes. "Because somewhere out there, someone is lost in the dark, and this light is the only thing that can guide them home." He nodded solemnly, as if I had just explained the meaning of life. I taught him everything I knew: how to trim the wicks and polish the brass, how to read the barometer and predict the weather, how to spot a ship in distress by the pattern of its lights. By the time he was 16, Tom could run the lighthouse as well as any keeper on the coast, but he wanted more than this isolated life could offer. He went to college, then to engineering school, and I watched my son grow into a man who built bridges and designed buildings that touched the sky. I was proud of him. Even when his visits became less frequent, even when months would pass without a phone call, Margaret understood. She always understood. "He has to find his own light," she told me. "We cannot keep him here forever." She died 8 years ago, in the hospice in Portland. I held her hand while the monitors beeped their mechanical requiem, and I told her about the sunset over the water, about the roses blooming in her garden, about the light that would keep burning until I drew my last breath. She smiled at me one final time, and then she was gone. I buried her in the churchyard overlooking the sea. Every Sunday, I would bring fresh flowers from her garden and sit beside her stone, telling her about the weather and the tides and the ships that passed in the night. When Tom came home for the funeral, he brought Miriam with him. I should have seen the coldness in her eyes, the way she calculated the value of everything she touched. But I was drowning in my own grief, and I mistook her politeness for compassion. Now Margaret is buried in the churchyard. Tom is buried beside her, and I am buried beneath the tower we built our lives around. Alive, but forgotten. Imprisoned by the woman who murdered my son. I pressed my hand against the cold stone wall of the basement and made a silent promise to the ghosts who lived in these walls. I would not let this be the end of our story. The symptoms had started so gradually that I mistook them for grief. In the weeks after Miriam moved me to the basement, I began to feel a heaviness in my limbs that I attributed to the damp cold of the concrete walls. My thoughts grew sluggish, as if someone had poured honey into the gears of my mind. I would lose hours staring at the high window, watching the light change without any memory of the time passing. I told myself it was depression. I told myself it was age. I told myself that any man who had lost his wife and his son would feel this fog settling over his brain like the marine layer that rolled in from the Atlantic every morning. But now, with Molly's note burning a hole in my pocket, I understood the truth. The fog was not grief. It was chemistry. I thought back over the past 6 months, cataloging every cup of tea Miriam had brought me with such tender concern. Every morning at 7 o'clock, regular as the tide. Every afternoon at 3. Sometimes, with a biscuit she claimed to have baked herself. Every evening at 8. To help me sleep, she said. The sleep had been the worst part. Not the natural rest of an exhausted body, but a thick, drugged unconsciousness that left me more tired when I woke than when I had closed my eyes. I would surface from those chemical depths feeling like I had been buried alive, clawing my way back to awareness through layers of cotton and concrete. The symptoms made terrible sense now. Dizziness, confusion, memory lapses, slurred speech, all the classic signs of dementia that Miriam had been so eager to document for the doctors she consulted without my knowledge. She had been creating the evidence of my mental decline, one poisoned cup at a time. I thought about the sleeping pills in the medicine cabinet upstairs, the ones Miriam claimed were for her insomnia. I thought about how easy it would be to crush them into powder, how the bitterness could be masked by honey and bergamot. I thought about my daughter-in-law standing at the kitchen counter each morning, stirring my death into a ceramic mug. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I had felt in 74 years of living. It burned through the chemical fog like a lighthouse beam cutting through darkness, sharp and bright and absolutely focused. She had taken my son. She had taken my freedom. She had tried to take my mind, but she had not counted on Molly. The girl began visiting me 3 nights after I received her note. She would wait until Miriam fell asleep in front of the television, then creep down to the basement door with offerings clutched in her small hands. Crackers wrapped in napkins, bottles of water from the refrigerator. Once, a banana that she had smuggled from the kitchen in her pajama pocket. I would hear her soft knock, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slow ones, and my heart would leap with a mixture of love and fear. Love for this brave child who risked everything to keep me alive. Fear of what Miriam would do if she ever discovered our secret communication. We developed a system. Molly would slide food and notes under the door, and I would slide back questions written on scraps of paper I tore from an old navigation manual I found in the corner. Our conversations were fragmentary, conducted in whispers and purple crayon. But they were enough. Through Molly, I learned that Miriam and Jake Thornton, a contractor who had been lurking around the lighthouse for months, were planning to sell the property. I learned that they had already contacted a developer in Portland who wanted to convert Beacon Point into a luxury resort. I learned that the only thing standing between them and a $1.2 million payday was a 74-year-old man who refused to die on schedule. On the 5th night of her visits, Molly told me something that stopped my heart. She was sitting on the other side of the door, her voice barely audible through the thick wood. I pressed my ear against the gap, straining to catch every word. "Daddy told me a secret," she whispered. "The night before he fell, he said if anything bad ever happened, I should find the red book in the lantern room. He said it would explain everything." "What red book, sweetheart?" "I don't know. He said it was hidden in his special place. The place where he used to hide things when he was little like me." I closed my eyes, my mind racing through decades of memories. Tom had always been a secretive child, squirreling away treasures in hiding spots throughout the lighthouse. But his favorite place, the one he thought I never knew about, was a loose board beneath the window seat in the lantern room. I had discovered it when he was 8 years old, but I never let on that I knew. Every child deserves at least one secret from their parents. "I know where it is," I said. "But Molly, you cannot go up there. It is too dangerous. If your mother catches you, she won't catch me." Molly's voice was firm, older than her 10 years. "Mommy drinks wine every night until she falls asleep. And Jake never stays past dinner anymore. They had a big fight last week. I wanted to argue. I wanted to protect this child from the darkness that had swallowed her father. But I also knew that the red book might be our only hope. If Tom had left evidence of Miriam's betrayal, it could be the key to everything." "Be careful," I said, the words inadequate for the weight of what I was asking. "I promise, Grandpa." Her small hand appeared under the door, and I grasped it with my own. Her fingers were warm against my cold skin. "Daddy always said the lighthouse keeps people safe," she whispered. "Now I have to keep you safe." Then she was gone, leaving me alone with the ghost of my son's secret and the terrible hope that his daughter might be brave enough to find it. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the darkness, listening to the distant rhythm of the waves, and I prayed to whatever God might be listening that I had not just sent a child to uncover her mother's sins. The morning Tom died began like any other October morning at Beacon Point. I remember because I was making his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real Maine maple syrup, when I heard the lighthouse door slam in the wind. The storm had been building since midnight, and by dawn, the waves were throwing themselves against the rocks like angry fists. Tom came down from the tower at 6:15, his face troubled in a way I had not seen since he was a boy struggling with something he could not name. He sat at the kitchen table but did not touch the pancakes I placed before him. Margaret always said Tom wore his heart on his sleeve, and that morning, his sleeve was soaked with worry. "Dad," he said, staring at the steam rising from his coffee, "if something happens to me, Promise, you'll take care of Molly. I laughed because that is what fathers do when their sons say strange things. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're 46 years old and healthier than I was at your age. Promise me. His voice cracked on the second word. I reached across the table and gripped his hand. His fingers were cold despite the warmth of the kitchen. I promise, son. But you're scaring your old man. What's going on? He opened his mouth to answer. But the kitchen door swung open, and Miriam appeared. Her smile too bright for such a dark morning. She crossed to Tom and kissed his cheek. But I noticed how he flinched just slightly, just enough for a father to see. Darling, you should rest today, Miriam said, her hand on his shoulder. You've been working so hard on the renovation. Let me bring you some tea to help you relax. Tom shook his head. I need to check the emergency systems. This storm's going to be bad. I'll come with you, I offered. But Miriam stepped between us. Jean, the doctor said you shouldn't climb all those stairs. Your heart. She turned to Tom. I'll go with him. I've been wanting to see the view from the top anyway. Something in Tom's eyes told me to argue, to insist, to follow them anyway. But I was 72 years old with a heart that occasionally reminded me of its existence. And I let my son walk out of that kitchen with the woman who would kill him. They climbed the tower together. Miriam came down alone. I was washing the breakfast dishes when I heard her scream. The sound cut through the storm like a blade, and I dropped the plate I was holding. It shattered at my feet as I ran outside. She stood at the base of the tower, rain soaking through her white blouse, her hands pressed against her face. Through her fingers, she screamed words I could not understand. Behind her, crumpled on the rocks like a broken promise. I do not remember reaching him. One moment I was at the cottage door. The next I was on my knees in the cold ocean spray, cradling Tom's head in my lap. His eyes were open but empty, and the rain mixed with the blood pooling beneath him until I could not tell which was which. He fell. Miriam sobbed somewhere behind me. We were looking at the storm, and he leaned too far over the railing. I tried to grab him, but he just fell. The railing around the observation deck was 4 feet high. Tom had climbed that tower since before he could walk. He knew every inch of it, every loose bolt, every weathered board. My son did not fall, but grief does strange things to a father's mind. The paramedics came, then the police. They asked their questions and wrote their notes. Miriam told her story so perfectly, with just enough tears and just enough trembling, that they believed every word. Accidental death, they concluded. A tragic accident during an autumn storm. For 2 years, I believed them. For 2 years, I wept at my son's grave and held my granddaughter while she cried for her daddy. For 2 years, I watched Miriam transform from grieving widow to comfortable heir, slowly draining the accounts Tom had worked so hard to build. Then came the basement. Then came the tea. Then came Molly's purple crayon note. Now, lying on this concrete floor with the taste of bitter almonds still fresh in my memory, I replay that morning over and over. The troubled look on Tom's face, his cold fingers gripping mine, the words he wanted to say before Miriam interrupted. If something happens to me, he knew. My God, he knew she was going to kill him, and he tried to warn me. The guilt that washes over me is worse than any poison. I should have seen it. I should have stopped them from climbing that tower. I should have been there when my son needed me most instead of washing dishes like some blind fool. But guilt is a luxury I cannot afford. Not anymore. Above me, I hear Miriam's footsteps crossing the kitchen floor. The water runs, the kettle clicks on, and soon she will descend these stairs with another cup of poisoned tea and another of her practiced smiles. Molly's note burns in my pocket like a coal. Dad told me a secret, she wrote in purple crayon. He said, Mommy pushed him. My son did not fall. My son was murdered, and the woman who killed him is coming down these stairs right now, carrying the same death she served him, expecting me to drink it like the helpless old man she believes me to be. I hear the first stair creak, the second, the third. Let her come. Let her pour her poison and speak her lies. Because tomorrow, when the fog rolls in from the Atlantic, my brother Frank is coming to Beacon Point. And when he arrives, Miriam Callahan's carefully constructed world is going to crumble like the rocks beneath this lighthouse. For Tom, for Molly, for 50 years of light. I will not go gentle into that dark basement. Getting a message to Frank was the hardest thing I had done in 60 years. Harder than climbing the tower in hurricane winds, harder than burying Margaret, harder even than watching them lower my son into the cold Maine earth. Because Miriam watched everything. She had taken my phone on the third day, claiming the doctor said screen time worsened dementia symptoms. She removed the landline a week later, explaining to anyone who asked that I had been making confused calls at all hours, frightening the neighbors. The laptop Tom had given me for my 70th birthday disappeared into her bedroom, and the old radio I kept for weather reports was confiscated after she caught me trying to tune into the Coast Guard frequency. I was a prisoner in every sense except chains. But Miriam made one mistake. She underestimated Molly. My granddaughter had her father's stubbornness and her grandmother Margaret's clever mind. At 10 years old, she understood more than any child should about the darkness living under her own roof. She watched her mother with eyes that missed nothing, and she remembered everything her father had taught her about keeping secrets. 3 days after I received the purple crayon note, Molly appeared at the basement door during Miriam's weekly trip to Portland for supplies. Her small voice came through the gap like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "Grandpa, I brought paper and a pencil. Mommy counts everything, but she doesn't count my school supplies." I pressed my face against the door, breathing in the smell of crayons and childhood that clung to my granddaughter like perfume. "Molly, honey, I need you to do something very important. Something secret. Just like the secrets Daddy told you." "I know, Grandpa. I'm good at secrets. I need you to mail a letter for me." "Can you do that?" Silence. Then, "The mailbox is at the end of the road. I walk past it every day, going to the bus stop." My heart swelled with pride and broke with sorrow simultaneously. No child should have to smuggle messages for her imprisoned grandfather. No child should carry the weight Molly carried. "Push the paper under the door, sweetheart. I'll write fast." Her fingers appeared again, sliding 2 sheets of lined notebook paper through the gap along with a yellow pencil sharpened to a fine point. I grabbed them like treasures and crawled to the small window where autumn light filtered through the dirty glass. My hands shook as I wrote. Not from the poison, though. My fingers had begun trembling more each day, but from the magnitude of what I was attempting. If Miriam found this letter, she would accelerate her plan. If the letter got lost, I would die in this basement, and my son's murder would remain forever unexplained. I wrote to my brother Frank in Detroit, choosing each word carefully. "Frank, I need help. Something terrible happened to Tom. It was not an accident. His wife did it, and now she is doing the same to me. She is poisoning me with something in the tea. Do not call ahead. Do not warn anyone. Just come. Please, come before it is too late. Bring help if you can, but come either way. For Tom. For our family. Your brother, Gene." I read the words 3 times, making sure they were clear enough for Frank to understand, but vague enough to seem like confused ramblings if Miriam intercepted them. Then I folded the paper into a small square and slipped it back under the door. "Molly, do you have an envelope?" "I have one from my birthday cards." "Mommy, let me keep them." "Good girl. Write this address on the front. Frank Callahan, 472 Riverside Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48215. Can you remember that?" She repeated it back perfectly. Tom had taught her well. "Put a stamp on it from Mommy's desk when she's not looking. Drop it in the mailbox tomorrow morning on your way to school. Don't let anyone see you do it." "I understand, Grandpa." Her voice carried a weight no 10-year-old should bear. "Daddy said Uncle Frank would help us if we ever needed him," he said. "Uncle Frank knows how to catch bad people." Tears burned my eyes. Frank had spent 35 years as a Detroit homicide detective before retiring 5 years ago. He had seen every kind of evil humans could devise, had put murderers behind bars when everyone else had given up. If anyone could help me now, it was my younger brother. Your daddy was right, sweetheart. Uncle Frank is coming to help us. Promise? I pressed my palm against the door, imagining I could feel her warmth through the wood. I promise. Molly. I promise. On the lighthouse. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, Grandpa, I have to go now. Mommy will be back soon, and she checks the mileage on her car. She knows exactly how long Portland takes. Go, honey. And Molly, thank you. You're the bravest person I know. Her footsteps retreated across the floor above me, and I was alone again with the silence and the shadows. But for the first time in 60 days, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. The next 4 days were the longest of my life. I played my role perfectly, drinking the tea Miriam brought, and then forcing myself to vomit it up when she left. I acted confused and weak, letting her believe her poison was working. I mumbled Margaret's name and asked for Tom as if I had forgotten he was dead. And every night, I lay awake in the darkness, counting the hours until Frank would come. On the 5th day, Molly slipped another note under the door. Just 3 words, in purple crayon. He got it. I pressed that note against my heart and wept with relief. Somewhere in Detroit, my brother was reading my desperate plea. Somewhere, help was finally on its way to Beacon Point. Hold on, I told myself. Just hold on a little longer. The light would not go out. Not yet. Frank arrived on a Tuesday morning when the fog was so thick you could not see the lighthouse beam until it was directly overhead. I knew he was coming before I heard his voice because Miriam's footsteps above me changed. They went from the lazy shuffle of a woman in complete control to the rapid clicking of someone caught off guard. Who are you? I heard her demand through the floorboards. This is private property. And then my brother's voice, rough as Maine granite, and just as unmovable. I'm Frank Callahan, Jean's brother, and I've driven 18 hours from Detroit to see him. So you're going to step aside right now. I pressed my ear against the basement door, my heart pounding so hard I feared it might give out before salvation reached me. After 67 days in this concrete tomb, my little brother had come. I'm afraid that's not possible, Miriam said, her voice shifting to that honeyed tone she used when manipulating doctors and lawyers. Jean has severe dementia. His physician has ordered complete rest. Visitors agitate him terribly. Lady, I've spent 35 years interrogating murderers, rapists, and con artists. You think I can't spot a liar when I hear one? Frank's footsteps grew louder, closer to the kitchen. Where is my brother? I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call the police. Call them, please. I'd love to have a conversation with the local sheriff about why a healthy 74-year-old man suddenly developed dementia 2 months after his son died and his daughter-in-law took control of his finances. Silence. Beautiful, damning silence. I summoned every ounce of strength in my poisoned body and pounded on the basement door. Frank! Frank! I'm down here. She's locked me in the basement. The sounds that followed were chaos, Miriam screaming, furniture scraping, footsteps thundering across the floor. Then the basement door shuddered as someone threw their weight against it. Jean, hold on, brother, I'm coming. The lock was a heavy deadbolt that Miriam had installed 3 weeks into my imprisonment. Frank hit the door again and again, and I heard wood splintering around the frame. On the 4th impact, the door burst open, and light flooded into my darkness, like the beam from our lighthouse reaching a lost ship. Frank stood at the top of the stairs, and for a moment neither of us could speak. I knew what he was seeing: his older brother, 20 pounds lighter than the last time we met. Pale as a ghost, trembling on shaky legs in clothes that had not been washed in weeks. His face crumpled with a mixture of rage and grief that I recognized from our father's funeral 40 years ago. My God, Jean. He descended the stairs 2 at a time and caught me as my knees buckled. What has she done to you? She killed Tom, I whispered into his shoulder. She killed my boy, and now she's killing me. Frank held me like he had when we were children, and I had broken my arm falling from the lighthouse rocks. His grip was fierce and protective, and I felt safer than I had in 2 years. I know, brother. I know. I started investigating the moment I got Molly's letter. Molly's letter? I pulled back to look at his face. I wrote that letter. Frank shook his head, his jaw tight with controlled fury. Molly wrote her own letter. Sent it the same day as yours. She told me everything, the tea, the locked door. The night she heard her mother talking to some man about making it look natural. He paused. Jean. That little girl has been documenting everything in a journal she hides under her mattress. Dates, times, conversations she overheard. She's been building a case against her own mother for 6 months. Tears spilled down my cheeks. My granddaughter, my brave little Molly, had been fighting for me in ways I never imagined. Where is Miriam now? I asked. Ran out the back when she realized what was happening. But she won't get far. Frank helped me up the stairs, his arm steady around my waist. I called the county sheriff on my way here, told him I had evidence of elder abuse, fraud, and possible murder. He's sending deputies. The kitchen was blinding after so long in the basement darkness. I squinted against the morning light, streaming through the windows, and breathed air that did not taste of mold and concrete. Through the window, I could see the lighthouse standing tall against the fog. Its beams still rotating, even though the automated system had taken over years ago. There's more, Frank. I gripped his arm as he guided me to a chair. Tom knew she was going to kill him. He tried to warn me that morning, but I didn't understand. And Molly told me I had to stop and breathe. Molly said. Tom told her a secret. And that her mother pushed him from the tower. Frank's expression hardened into something I had seen only a few times in our lives, the look of a detective who has found his killer and will not rest until justice is served. She's not going to hurt anyone else, Jean. I promise you that on our mother's grave, a car door slammed outside, and we both turned toward the sound. Through the kitchen window, I saw a brown county sheriff's cruiser pulling up the gravel drive. Behind it came a second vehicle, an unmarked sedan that had federal plates. Who else did you call? I asked. Frank smiled grimly. I still have friends in law enforcement, good friends who owed me favors. When I told them what was happening here, they wanted to help. The front door opened without a knock, and a tall woman in a dark suit stepped inside, followed by 2 uniformed deputies. She surveyed the kitchen with sharp eyes that missed nothing, then settled her gaze on me. Mr. Eugene Callahan? Yes. Ma'am, I'm Special Agent Diana Torres with the FBI's Elder Abuse Task Force. Your brother contacted us 3 days ago with evidence of fraud, imprisonment, and suspected homicide. She glanced at Frank with what might have been respect. We've been building a case while he drove here. We have warrants for Miriam Callahan's arrest, and we've frozen her bank accounts as of 6 o'clock this morning. I looked at my brother, my stubborn, relentless, wonderful brother, and felt something I had not felt in 2 years. I felt like Tom might finally get justice. Louise Brennan had lived next door to the Beacon Point Lighthouse for 43 years. She was 71 years old, sharp as a tack, and had watched our family through every season of joy and sorrow since Tom was a boy catching fireflies in the summer grass. When Agent Torres asked if there were witnesses who might have observed unusual activity at the property, I knew exactly who to call. Louise arrived within the hour, her silver hair pinned back in the same practical bun she had worn since I first met her. She carried a leather notebook that looked older than some of the deputies, and her eyes blazed with the righteous anger of a woman who had suspected something terrible and been unable to prove it. I knew it, she said before anyone could offer her a chair. I knew that woman was evil the moment she stepped foot in this town. But nobody wanted to listen to an old busybody. Agent Torres guided her to the kitchen table where Frank and I were already seated. The deputies had secured the perimeter, and a forensics team was on its way from Portland. Miriam was still missing, but roadblocks had been set up on every route out of Beacon Point. "Mrs. Brennan, I understand you've been keeping records of activity at this property," Torres said, her pen poised over a federal notepad. Louise opened her leather notebook and spread it on the table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. 43 years of living next to this lighthouse, and I've never seen anything like the past 2 years. It started the week after Tom's funeral. She flipped to a page dated October 15th, 2 years ago. 3 days after we buried that sweet boy, I saw Miriam meeting with a man in a black pickup truck. They were parked behind the maintenance shed, where they thought nobody could see them. But my kitchen window faces that direction, and I was washing dishes at 6:30 in the morning. "Can you describe this man?" Torres asked. "Tall, maybe 6 feet. Dark hair going gray at the temples. He wore work boots and a contractor's jacket. I'd seen him around town before Jake something. Works construction over in Camden." Frank and I exchanged glances. Jake Thornton. The name matched what Molly had overheard. Louise continued, turning pages filled with dates, times, and observations written in neat cursive. "That man visited at least twice a week for the first 6 months, always when Gene was at his doctor's appointments or running errands. Then Gene stopped leaving the house altogether." "When did you first notice something was wrong with Mr. Callahan?" Torres asked. 8 months ago. Louise's voice trembled with guilt. "Gene used to walk to the harbor every morning at 7 to have coffee with the fishermen. 50 years he did that, rain or shine. Then suddenly he stopped. Miriam told everyone he had developed dementia, that he was confused and couldn't be left alone." She reached across the table and gripped my hand. "Gene, I am so sorry. I should have done more. I should have called someone." "You're doing something now," I said, squeezing her fingers. "That's what matters." Louise wiped her eyes and turned to another page. 2 months ago, I saw something that made me sick to my stomach. It was around 11 at night, and I couldn't sleep because my hip was bothering me. I went to the kitchen for some water and saw lights moving near the basement entrance on the side of the Lighthouse cottage. The room went silent. Torres leaned forward. Miriam was carrying something down those stairs. At first, I thought it was laundry. She had a basket. But then, I saw Gene's face through the basement window. Just for a second. In the moonlight. He looked like a prisoner of war. She turned to me, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself no daughter-in-law would lock her father-in-law in a basement. But I wrote it down anyway. Because my mother always said, "The truth has a way of coming out." Agent Torres took the notebook carefully, treating it like the evidence it was. "Mrs. Brennan, this is incredibly valuable. Your records could be crucial to this case. There's more." Louise pulled a small envelope from her cardigan pocket. "Last month, I was walking past the lighthouse on my way to the post office. Miriam's car was gone, and I heard knocking coming from the basement window. I went closer, and I heard Gene's voice calling for help. My throat tightened. I remembered that day. I had seen Louise's shadow pass the window and pounded on the glass with every ounce of strength I had. I should have broken the window right then," Louise said, her voice cracking. "But I was scared. Scared of being wrong. Scared of making a scene. Scared of that woman. So instead, I went home and wrote a letter to the county social services. Anonymous. Because I was a coward." She pushed the envelope toward Torres. They never responded. I called twice to follow up, and both times, they said they had no record of my complaint. Torres opened the envelope and read the letter inside, her expression darkening. "Mrs. Brennan, do you have proof you sent this?" "I sent it certified mail." "The receipt is in there too." Frank stood up abruptly, his detective instincts fully engaged. Someone intercepted that complaint. Someone with access to county mail or connections inside the social services office. Torres nodded slowly. "We'll investigate. This may go deeper than one woman acting alone." The weight of her words settled over the room like the fog outside. Miriam had planned everything meticulously, the isolation, the poison, the cover story. But she could not have done it all by herself. Someone had helped her suppress Louise's complaint. Someone had looked the other way, while an old man was slowly murdered in his own home. Louise stood and walked to where I sat, then wrapped her arms around me in a hug that smelled like lavender and reminded me of my mother. "I'm going to testify at her trial," she whispered in my ear. "I'm going to tell everyone what I saw, and I'm going to make sure that woman never hurts anyone again." I held on to my neighbor, my friend, my witness, and let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in this world worth fighting for. The forensics team found the journal hidden inside the lantern room, tucked behind a loose brick that only someone who knew the lighthouse intimately would ever discover. Tom had shown me that hiding spot when he was 12 years old, proud of finding a secret his father had missed after decades of climbing those stairs. I never imagined he would use it to document his own murder. Agent Torres brought the journal to me wrapped in an evidence bag, her face carrying the weight of what she had read. She set it on the kitchen table where I sat with Frank, and for a long moment, none of us spoke. The cover was red leather, worn at the corners from frequent handling, and Tom's initials were embossed in gold at the bottom right corner. Margaret had given him that journal for his 40th birthday, 6 years before his death. "Mr. Callahan," Torres said gently, "I need to warn you that the contents are disturbing. Your son documented everything: the affair, the financial theft, his suspicions about being poisoned. He knew what was coming." My hands trembled as I reached for the bag. "I need to read it." Frank put his hand on my shoulder. "Jean, maybe you should wait. Let the investigators." He was my son. I met my brother's eyes with a resolve I did not know I still possessed. "I need to know what happened to my boy." Torres nodded and carefully removed the journal from the evidence bag, placing it before me. "We've already photographed every page for the case file. You can keep this when the trial is over." I opened the cover and saw Tom's handwriting neat and precise, just like his mother's, filling the first page with a date from 18 months before his death. March 15th. "Something is wrong with Miriam. She's been distant for months, but today I found a receipt in her coat pocket for a hotel in Camden. We don't know anyone in Camden. When I asked her about it, she said it was a client meeting for her consulting work. But her eyes did something strange when she answered. They went flat, like a shark's." I turned the page, my heart breaking with every word my son had written. April 2nd. "I followed her today. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she's hiding something. She drove to a construction site on Route 1 and met a man by a black pickup truck. They talked for 20 minutes. And then she kissed him. Not a friendly kiss. The kind of kiss that tells you everything you need to know." The entries continued through spring and into summer, documenting Tom's growing horror as he uncovered layer after layer of his wife's betrayal. He discovered the affair with Jake Thornton had been going on for 3 years. He found evidence that Miriam had been siphoning money from their joint accounts into a shell company called Beacon Holdings. He learned that she had taken out a life insurance policy on him worth $300,000 without his knowledge. July 19th. I confronted her tonight after Molly went to bed. I told her I knew about Jake, about the money, about everything. She didn't even deny it. She just smiled and said I should be careful about making accusations I couldn't prove. Then she poured me a cup of tea and watched me drink it with the strangest expression on her face, like she was waiting for something. I had to stop reading. My chest felt like it was being crushed by the weight of Tom's words. Frank took the journal from my hands and continued reading aloud, his detective's voice steady even as his eyes glistened with tears. July 23rd. "I've been sick for 4 days. The doctor says it's probably a virus, but I don't believe him anymore. I don't believe anyone except Molly. I told her that if anything happens to me, she should find the hiding spot in the lighthouse, the one Grandpa doesn't know I know about, and look for this journal. She's only 8. But she understood. She promised." Frank's voice cracked on the next entry. August 15th. "I'm getting weaker every day. Whatever she's putting in my food is destroying me from the inside. I've started pretending to eat and hiding what I can. But she watches everything. I thought about going to the police, but Jake's cousin works for the county sheriff. I thought about telling Dad, but I'm afraid of what Miriam might do to him if he gets involved. So I'm writing everything down instead. Every detail. Every suspicion. Every piece of evidence I've found. Joe. If I die, this journal will be my testimony. The final entry was dated the day before Tom fell from the lighthouse. Frank's hand shook as he read it. October 11th. She knows I've been documenting everything. I saw her searching my office this morning when she thought I was in the shower. Tomorrow I'm going to move this journal to the hiding spot in the lantern room. If you're reading this, then I'm already gone. Please, whoever finds this, don't let her get away with it. Don't let her hurt my father or my daughter. And tell them both that I love them more than anything in this world. Tell them I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stop her. The kitchen was silent except for the sound of my own sobbing. Tom had known. My beautiful, brave boy had known he was going to die. And his last thoughts had been of protecting Molly and me. Agent Torres spoke softly. Mr. Callahan, your son's journal names Jake Thornton as a co-conspirator. It also mentions Jake's cousin in the sheriff's department, Deputy Marcus Cole. We believe he's the one who intercepted Mrs. Brennan's complaint. I looked up at her through my tears. So, it wasn't just Miriam. No, sir. It appears to be a conspiracy involving at least 3 people, possibly more. We're executing arrest warrants for Jake Thornton and Deputy Cole within the hour. Frank closed the journal and placed it in my hands. Tom gave you everything you need to put them all away, Jean. He saved you even after he was gone. I held my son's final words against my chest and made a silent promise to the boy I had raised in this lighthouse. I would not let his sacrifice be in vain. The video files were found on a micro SD card taped to the inside cover of Tom's journal. Agent Torres almost missed it, a tiny black rectangle no bigger than my thumbnail, hidden beneath the leather binding like a secret within a secret. When the forensics technician extracted it and plugged it into a laptop, the room fell so silent I could hear the waves crashing against the rocks 200 feet below. There were 14 files in total, each one dated and numbered. The first was recorded 6 months before Tom's death. Is this thing working? Tom's face filled the screen, and I had to grip the table to keep from collapsing. He looked thin already, dark circles under his eyes, but his voice was steady. Okay, my name is Thomas Eugene Callahan. I'm 46 years old, and I'm recording this because I believe my wife Miriam is trying to kill me. Frank moved his chair closer to mine, his presence the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. I know how crazy that sounds. Tom continued on the screen. A month ago, I would have laughed at anyone who suggested it, but I've been sick for weeks now, and the doctors can't find anything wrong. The only pattern I can identify is that I feel worse after meals that Miriam prepares, especially the tea she insists I drink every evening. He held up a small glass vial filled with amber liquid. Tonight I pretended to drink my tea, but actually poured it into this container when she left the room. I'm going to have it tested at a private lab in Portland. If I'm wrong, then I'm just a paranoid husband who needs therapy. But if I'm right, he paused, his jaw tightening. If I'm right, then someone needs to know the truth. The second video was recorded 2 weeks later. Tom's face was grayer, his hands trembling slightly as he held up a piece of paper. The lab results came back. The tea contained crushed zolpidem sleeping pills in concentrations high enough to cause liver damage over time. Not enough to kill quickly, but enough to make it look like natural organ failure if consumed daily for several months. His voice broke. My wife is poisoning me. The woman I've been married to for 12 years, the mother of my daughter, is slowly murdering me. I watched my son struggle to compose himself on the screen, and I felt something inside me shatter into pieces too small to ever reassemble. The videos continued through the following months, each one documenting another piece of evidence Tom had gathered. He filmed Miriam, meeting Jake behind the maintenance shed. He recorded phone conversations where she discussed the timeline and the inheritance. He captured footage of her adding powder to his evening tea when she thought he was upstairs with Molly. Video number 11 was the hardest to watch. Tom sat in the lantern room at night, the lighthouse beam rotating behind him, casting strange shadows across his gaunt face. "I know I don't have much time left," he said quietly. "But I can't go to the police because Jake's cousin is a deputy, and I don't know how deep this conspiracy goes. I can't tell my father because Miriam will hurt him too. She's already mentioned putting him in a nursing home once I'm gone." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes burning with desperate intensity. "So I'm leaving everything here, in the place where I grew up, where my father taught me to keep the light burning no matter how dark the storm. Whoever finds this, please, I'm begging you, protect my daughter, protect my father, and make sure Miriam Callahan pays for what she's done." The 12th video was recorded the night before Tom died. He looked like a ghost of the strong man who had once climbed these lighthouse stairs 2 at a time. "Tomorrow I'm going to confront her. I know it's dangerous, but I can't live like this anymore, being poisoned in my own home." Watching her smile at me across the dinner table while she calculates how many more doses until my heart gives out. He coughed, a wet, terrible sound. "If something happens to me, remember, the truth is in the lantern room. The truth is always in the light." The 13th video made Agent Torres stop the playback and call her supervisor in Washington. It showed Miriam and Jake in the Lighthouse cottage kitchen, unaware they were being filmed through a gap in the pantry door. The date stamp read, October 12th, the morning of Tom's death. "Is it done?" Jake asked, his voice tinny through the laptop speakers. "Almost." Miriam's smile was colder than the Atlantic in January. "He's weak enough now that a fall would surprise no one. The doctors have already noted his declining health in his medical records. And the old man? Gene will be easy. A few months of isolation, some carefully managed dementia symptoms, and we'll have power of attorney before spring. Then it's just a matter of adjusting his medication until his heart gives out." Jake laughed. "You really thought of everything. I've been planning this for 3 years, darling. Ever since I realized that Lighthouse is worth more than Tom's pathetic salary could ever provide." She picked up a teacup and examined it in the light. "By this time next year, we'll be in Florida with over $1 million and no one will ever know what happened at Beacon Point." The video ended. The room was silent, except for my own ragged breathing. Agent Torres closed the laptop slowly. "Mr. Callahan, your son recorded his own murder confession. This is the most comprehensive evidence package I've seen in 15 years with the Bureau." I stared at the blank screen where my son's face had been moments ago. He had known he was going to die. He had accepted it, and in his final weeks, instead of running, or fighting, or saving himself, he had built a case that would bring his killers to justice and protect the people he loved. "That's my boy," I whispered through my tears. "That's my Tom." Frank put his arm around me as I wept for my son's courage and my son's sacrifice and all the years we would never have together. But through the grief, I felt something else rising in my chest. Pride. Miriam ran, but she did not run far enough. Agent Torres coordinated the search from our kitchen table, transforming the Lighthouse cottage into a command center within hours of viewing Tom's videos. Federal agents arrived from Portland, Boston, and as far as New York. The Coast Guard deployed 2 cutters to patrol the waters around Beacon Point in case she attempted to escape by sea. State police set up checkpoints on every road within 50 miles. Jake Thornton was arrested at 7:43 that evening, pulled over on Route 1 while attempting to reach the Canadian border. Deputy Marcus Cole was taken into custody at his own precinct, led out in handcuffs past colleagues who stared in disbelief. But Miriam remained a ghost, vanishing into the Maine fog like she had never existed. "She planned for this," Frank said, studying a map spread across the kitchen table. "A woman this calculating would have an escape route prepared." Torres nodded grimly. "We've frozen her accounts, but she withdrew $8,000 in cash 3 days ago. She could be anywhere." I sat by the window, watching the lighthouse beam cut through the darkness, and thought about the woman who had destroyed my family. For 12 years, she had lived under this roof, eaten at this table, kissed my son goodnight. For 12 years, she had smiled and laughed and pretended to be part of our family while secretly plotting to take everything we had. "She'll head for Florida," I said quietly. Both Torres and Frank turned to look at me. In Tom's videos, she mentioned Florida. She and Jake bought property there, a beachfront house purchased through a shell company. I met Torres's eyes. That's where she's going. It's the only place she has left. Torres was on her phone within seconds, coordinating with FBI field offices in Florida. Within an hour, we had confirmation. A property in Tampa, registered to Beacon Holdings LLC, purchased 18 months ago for $640,000. Miriam's escape plan had a destination, but Florida was 1,500 miles away, and Miriam had a head start. The break came at 11:23 that night. A gas station attendant in New Hampshire called the FBI tip line after recognizing Miriam from the news coverage that had begun spreading across New England. She had stopped for fuel and coffee, paying cash, driving a gray sedan that matched the description of a vehicle reported stolen from Beacon Point's small marina. She's taking back roads, Frank observed, tracing possible routes on the map. Avoiding the interstate, where there are more cameras and checkpoints. Smart, Torres admitted. But slow. If she stays on secondary roads, it'll take her at least 24 hours to reach Florida. Then we have time to get ahead of her. Torres made another call, and within minutes, FBI teams were positioning themselves along Miriam's projected route. Surveillance was established at the Tampa property. Every law enforcement agency between Maine and Florida received her photograph and vehicle description. I should have felt satisfied. I should have felt like justice was finally within reach, but all I could think about was Molly, my granddaughter, who had lost her father and was about to watch her mother be arrested for his murder. Where is Molly? I asked suddenly, realizing I had not seen her since Frank broke down the basement door. Torres's expression softened. She's with Child Protective Services. Standard procedure. When? No. I stood up so fast my chair fell backward. She's not going to some government facility. She's staying with family. Mr. Callahan, I understand your concern, but until the investigation is complete, that little girl saved my life. My voice cracked with emotion I could no longer contain. She risked everything to help me. She wrote letters, kept journals, brought me food when her mother wasn't looking. She is 10 years old, and she has been braver than any adult I know. She is not spending another night away from the people who love her. Frank stepped forward, placing himself beside me. Agent Torres. I'm a retired Detroit homicide detective with 35 years of service. I'll take personal responsibility for Molly's safety until this is resolved. Torres looked between us, two old men demanding custody of a child in the middle of a murder investigation, and something in her eyes shifted. Let me make some calls. An hour later, Molly walked through the cottage door, clutching a purple backpack and the worn stuffed rabbit she had carried since she was 3. When she saw me standing in the kitchen, free and alive and waiting for her, she dropped everything and ran into my arms. Grandpa, she sobbed against my chest. I was so scared. They said Mommy was gone and you were sick and I didn't know what was happening. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling her small heart racing against mine. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. Frank knelt beside us, his gruff detective's face melting into something gentle. Hey there, Molly. I'm your Uncle Frank. Your daddy used to tell me you were the smartest kid he ever met. Molly pulled back and studied Frank with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Daddy said, you catch bad people. That's right. Are you going to catch Mommy? Frank's jaw tightened, but his voice remained soft. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to catch her, and she's never going to hurt anyone again. Molly nodded slowly, then turned back to me. Her small hand found mine and squeezed with surprising strength. Good, she said, because Daddy told me to be brave until help came. And help is finally here. I looked at my granddaughter, this incredible, resilient child who had survived horrors no 10-year-old should ever face, and made a silent vow. Whatever happened next, whatever the investigation revealed, whatever the future held, I would spend every remaining day of my life making sure Molly knew she was loved, protected, and never alone again. The lighthouse beam swept across the fog outside, steady and eternal. The hunt for Miriam continued through the night. They found Miriam 3 days later, in a motel outside Savannah, Georgia. I was sitting on the cottage porch with Molly when Agent Torres called with the news. The morning fog had just begun to lift, and Molly was teaching me how to braid friendship bracelets, a skill her father had apparently learned from YouTube and passed on to her. My fingers were too thick and clumsy for the delicate work. But Molly was patient, guiding my hands with the same gentle determination she had shown throughout this entire nightmare. "Mr. Callahan," Torres said, her voice carrying an edge of satisfaction I had not heard before. "We have her." I stood up so quickly that the bracelet threads scattered across the porch. Molly looked up at me with wide eyes, reading my expression the way children do when they have learned to fear bad news. "Is it, Mommy?" she asked quietly. I nodded, then spoke into the phone. "What happened?" Torres explained that Miriam had made it as far as Georgia before her luck ran out. She had been using cash and staying at small motels off the main highways, just as Frank predicted. But 3 days of running had made her careless. She used a credit card to buy gas when her cash ran low. A card registered to her shell company that the FBI had been monitoring since the investigation began. "Local police surrounded the motel at 4 this morning," Torres continued. "She tried to run through the back, but our agents were waiting. She's in federal custody now, being transported to Portland for arraignment." I closed my eyes and felt something release in my chest, a tension I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "Is she talking?" I asked. "Oh, she's talking plenty. Mostly threats and demands for lawyers. But Jake Thornton started cooperating yesterday in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's given us everything: dates, methods, financial records, combined with your son's evidence. We have an airtight case." I thanked Torres and ended the call, then stood on the porch, watching the lighthouse beam fade in the growing daylight. After 67 days in the basement, after 2 years of mourning a son I thought had died by accident, after a lifetime of keeping the light burning through every storm, it was finally over. Molly tugged at my sleeve. "Grandpa? What's going to happen to Mommy?" One mine. I knelt down to meet her eyes, those beautiful brown eyes that reminded me so much of Tom. How do you explain evil to a 10-year-old? How do you tell a child that the woman who gave her life had also taken her father's? "Your mommy did some very bad things," I said carefully. "Things that hurt people. Things that hurt your daddy. And now she has to answer for those things." "Is she going to jail?" "Yes, sweetheart." For a very long time, Molly was quiet for a moment, her small fingers twisting the bracelet threads in her lap. Then she looked up at me, with an expression far too old for her years. "Daddy told me once that sometimes the people who are supposed to love us are the ones who hurt us the most. He said that doesn't mean we're bad or that we did something wrong. It just means some people are broken inside in ways we can't fix." My throat tightened. Even facing death, my son had tried to prepare his daughter for the truth. "Your daddy was a very wise man," I managed to say. "He said you would take care of me if anything happened. He made me promise to find you and Uncle Frank." She reached out and took my weathered hand in her small one. "I kept my promise, Grandpa." I pulled her into my arms and held her against my chest, feeling her heartbeat synchronize with mine. "You did more than keep a promise, Molly. You saved my life. You saved both of us." Frank appeared in the doorway, a cup of coffee in each hand. He had aged 10 years in the past week, but his eyes carried a spark of triumph that told me Torres had already called him too. "They got her," he said simply. "They got her." He handed me a coffee and settled into the chair beside mine. For a long moment, the three of us sat in silence, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. The lighthouse stood tall behind us, its white paint gleaming in the morning light, its purpose unchanged after 177 years. "What happens now?" Frank asked. I thought about the question, really thought about it for the first time since this nightmare began. For so long, survival had been my only goal. Survive the basement, survive the poison, survive long enough to see justice done. But now that justice was within reach, I had to consider what came after. Now we rebuild, I said finally. This lighthouse has stood through hurricanes and wars and everything the world could throw at it. Our family will do the same. Molly looked up at me. Can I stay here with you, Grandpa? Forever? I smiled, the first real smile I had felt on my face in 2 years. Forever and always. Sweetheart. This is your home. It always has been. Frank raised his coffee cup. To Tom, the bravest son and father I ever knew, I raised mine to meet his. To Tom, and to Molly, who finished what he started. Molly giggled and raised her orange juice box to join our toast. To us, the Lighthouse family. The words hit me harder than I expected. The Lighthouse family. Tom was gone. Margaret was gone. And the woman who had pretended to be part of our family had tried to destroy us all. But here we were, an old lighthouse keeper, a retired detective, and a 10-year-old girl with purple crayons still standing, still together, still keeping the light burning. Miriam would face justice. The trial would come. The truth would be told to the world. But in that moment, with the sun warming my face and my granddaughter's hand in mine, I realized that we had already won. The trial began on a frozen January morning in the federal courthouse in Portland. Snow fell in thick curtains outside the tall windows, but inside the courtroom, the only chill came from Miriam Callahan's eyes as she was led to the defendant's table in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. I sat in the front row of the gallery with Frank on one side and Molly on the other. We had debated whether to bring Molly, she was only 10, and the testimony would be brutal, but she had insisted with a stubbornness that reminded me of her father. I need to see it, she had told me the night before. I need to see that she can't hurt us anymore. So we brought her, and she sat between us, with her purple backpack at her feet and her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest, watching her mother with an expression I could not read. The prosecution's opening statement painted a picture of calculated evil that made even the hardened journalists in the back rows shift uncomfortably in their seats. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Walsh was a small woman with silver hair and a voice like a scalpel, cutting through the defense's objections with surgical precision. The evidence will show, Walsh declared, that Miriam Callahan spent 3 years planning and executing the murders of her husband Thomas Callahan and the attempted murder of her father-in-law Eugene Callahan. She poisoned her husband slowly over 18 months, using crushed sleeping pills dissolved in tea. When the poison weakened him sufficiently, she pushed him from the lighthouse observation deck and staged it as an accidental fall. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I felt Frank's hand grip my shoulder. She then imprisoned her 74-year-old father-in-law in a basement for 67 days, poisoning him with the same method, while systematically isolating him from friends, family, and medical care. Her goal was to inherit the Beacon Point Lighthouse property, valued at over $1 million, and collect $500,000 in life insurance. Walsh turned to face the jury, 12 ordinary citizens who would decide Miriam's fate. But Miriam Callahan made one mistake. People, Daralan, she underestimated the courage of a 10-year-old girl and the love of a family that refused to be destroyed. The trial lasted 11 days. 11 days of testimony, evidence, and revelations that peeled back the layers of Miriam's deception like skin from a wound. Agent Torres presented Tom's videos, and I watched the jury's faces transform from skepticism to horror as my son's voice filled the courtroom, documenting his own murder from beyond the grave. Several jurors wept openly. One had to be excused to compose herself. Dr. Helen Marsh, the physician who had first diagnosed my supposed dementia, took the stand with tears streaming down her face. "I should have seen it," she said, her voice cracking. The symptoms didn't match any normal progression. But Mrs. Callahan was so convincing, so concerned. I trusted her assessment over my own medical judgment. The defense attorney tried to paint Miriam as a victim of an abusive marriage, a woman driven to desperate measures by a controlling husband. But Tom's videos destroyed that narrative before it could take root. The jury saw Tom's gentle face, heard his measured words, watched him struggle to protect his daughter and father even as poison ate away at his organs. Jake Thornton testified for the prosecution as part of his plea deal. He described the affair, the financial schemes, the murder plot, all while carefully avoiding Miriam's gaze. His testimony confirmed every detail in Tom's journal and added new horrors we had not known. "She laughed about it," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I heard Molly make a small sound beside me, not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, and I pulled her closer against my side." The most devastating testimony came from Deputy Marcus Cole, who had accepted $5,000 to intercept Louise Brennan's complaint and suppress any investigation into the Lighthouse. He described a network of small corruptions, favors exchanged, eyes deliberately turned away. His testimony implicated 3 other county employees who had helped Miriam isolate me from potential rescuers. But it was Molly's testimony that broke the courtroom. She took the stand on the 8th day, so small that the bailiff had to adjust the microphone down to reach her. She wore the purple dress we had bought for the occasion, and she carried her stuffed rabbit for courage. "Can you tell us about the note you wrote to your grandfather?" Walsh asked, gently. Molly nodded, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "I used my purple crayon because it was Daddy's favorite color. He always said purple was the color of bravery." "And what did the note say?" "Don't drink the tea. It's making you sick like it made Daddy sick." Molly paused, her eyes finally finding her mother across the courtroom. "Mommy thought I didn't know, but I knew everything. Daddy told me to watch and remember and wait for help." The courtroom was silent. Even Miriam's attorney stopped taking notes. "Were you scared, Molly?" "Yes. Every day. But Daddy said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." She lifted her chin. "So I did the right thing. I watched the jury watch my granddaughter. And I knew in that moment that Miriam had lost." The verdict came on the 11th day, after only 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of Thomas Callahan. Attempted first-degree murder of Eugene Callahan. Elder abuse. Fraud. Conspiracy. The charges stacked up like stones on a grave. Miriam showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of cold indifference, even as the gallery erupted in murmurs and the judge called for order. But I saw her hands. They trembled against the table, betraying the fear she refused to show on her face. Justice had finally come to Beacon Point. 3 weeks after the verdict, we returned to the Portland courthouse for sentencing. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold remained a bitter February freeze that matched the atmosphere inside the courtroom. Miriam looked different. The orange jumpsuit had been replaced by a gray one, and her face had thinned in the weeks since the trial. Her hair, once perfectly styled, hung limp around her shoulders. Prison had already begun its work of stripping away the polished facade she had maintained for so many years. Judge Patricia Harmon presided over the hearing, a 63-year-old woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen every kind of evil humanity could produce. She had served on the federal bench for 22 years, and her reputation for fairness was matched only by her reputation for severity when faced with crimes against the vulnerable. The courtroom was packed. Louise Brennan sat 3 rows behind me, clutching her leather notebook like a talisman. Agent Torres stood against the back wall with 2 other federal agents. Journalists filled every remaining seat, their cameras forbidden, but their pens moving constantly across notepads. Frank held Molly's hand on one side of me. On the other side sat an empty chair, the chair where Tom should have been, where Margaret should have been, where all the people Miriam had stolen from us should have been sitting. "Before I pronounce sentence," Judge Harmon began, "the court will hear victim impact statements. Mr. Eugene Callahan, you may approach." I had written and rewritten my statement a dozen times, trying to find words that could capture what Miriam had taken from me. In the end, I abandoned the paper and spoke from my heart. "Your Honor," I said, gripping the podium to steady my trembling hands. "I spent 50 years keeping the Beacon Point Lighthouse. 50 years making sure the light never went out. no matter how fierce the storm. I believed that was my life's purpose, to guide ships safely home, to be a beacon in the darkness. I paused, gathering strength. But I was wrong. My true purpose was raising my son Tom, watching him grow from a curious boy into a good man, teaching him that integrity matters more than wealth, that family is the most precious thing we have. Tom understood those lessons better than I ever could have hoped. My voice cracked, but I forced myself to continue. Miriam Callahan took my son from me. She poisoned him slowly, methodically, while smiling across the dinner table. She pushed him from the lighthouse he loved and watched him fall 89 feet to his death. Then she locked me in a basement and tried to do the same to me. I turned to face Miriam directly. Her eyes met mine for the first time since the trial began, and I saw nothing there, no remorse, no guilt, no humanity. "You didn't just kill my son," I said. "You made his last months a living hell. You made him doubt his own sanity, his own body, his own wife. You took a good man and destroyed him piece by piece while your daughter watched. And then you tried to destroy me and take everything our family had built over generations." I turned back to the judge. "I don't believe in revenge, Your Honor. My son didn't believe in it either. But I believe in justice. I believe in protecting the innocent from those who would harm them. And I believe that Miriam Callahan should never have the opportunity to hurt another human being for as long as she lives." Judge Harmon nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the court?" To my surprise, Molly stood up. Frank tried to hold her back, but she slipped free and walked to the front of the courtroom with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. "Your Honor," she said, her small voice amplified by the microphone. "My name is Molly Callahan. I'm 10 years old. The defendant is my mother." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even Miriam's attorney stopped shuffling papers. "My daddy told me that love is supposed to protect people, not hurt them. He said that mommies and daddies are supposed to keep their children safe." Molly's voice wavered but did not break. "My mommy didn't do that. She hurt my daddy. She hurt my grandpa. She would have hurt me too if Grandpa and Uncle Frank hadn't stopped her." She turned to face Miriam, this brave little girl confronting the monster who had given her life. "I used to pray every night that you would change, that you would stop being mean and start being the mommy I wished you were. But Daddy taught me that wishing doesn't change people. Only they can change themselves. And some people don't want to." Molly's grip tightened on her rabbit. "I don't hate you, Mommy," Daddy said. "Hate is like poison. It hurts the person who drinks it more than the person it's meant for. But I don't want to see you anymore. I don't want to write you letters or visit you or pretend that what you did was okay. Because it wasn't okay. It will never be okay." She turned back to the judge. "That's all I wanted to say. Thank you." The courtroom was silent as Molly walked back to her seat. I pulled her into my arms, tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed by the strength and grace of this child who had endured so much. Judge Harmon cleared her throat, visibly moved. "Thank you, Molly. Your father would be very proud of you." She then turned her attention to Miriam. "Will the defendant please rise?" Miriam stood, her chains rattling softly in the silence. "Miriam Callahan, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Your crimes were premeditated, calculated, and utterly devoid of mercy. You betrayed every bond of trust that family creates, and you showed no remorse throughout these proceedings." The judge's voice hardened. "For the murder of Thomas Callahan, I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. For the attempted murder of Eugene Callahan, I sentence you to an additional 25 years. For elder abuse, 15 years. For fraud and conspiracy, 10 years each. These sentences will run consecutively." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into Miriam's. "You will die in prison, Mrs. Callahan. And that is the most merciful sentence this court can offer." The gavel fell like thunder. Justice, at last. Spring arrived at Beacon Point like a promise kept after a long winter of waiting. The snow melted, the harbor ice cracked and drifted out to sea, and the first green shoots pushed through the soil around the Lighthouse cottage. I stood on the porch one April morning, breathing air that smelled of salt and renewal, and realized I had survived. The basement door had been removed entirely. Frank hired a contractor from Camden, a man he had thoroughly vetted, unlike Jake Thornton, to transform the space into a proper storage room with windows that let in natural light. I would never again look at that doorway and see a prison. Now it held gardening tools, holiday decorations, and boxes of Tom's childhood memorabilia that I was finally strong enough to sort through. The cottage itself needed work after 2 years of Miriam's neglect. She had focused all her attention on maintaining appearances for visitors, while letting the bones of the house deteriorate. The roof leaked in 3 places. The furnace wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. The kitchen cabinets hung crooked on hinges she had never bothered to repair. But we fixed it all. Frank proved surprisingly handy with a hammer, a skill he said he had developed during 35 years of renovating his Detroit bungalow between homicide cases. Louise Brennan organized a group of neighbors who descended on the property one Saturday morning with paint cans, power tools, and enough casseroles to feed an army. "This lighthouse has watched over our town for 177 years, Louise declared, directing volunteers like a general commanding troops. "We're not about to let it fall apart now." Molly appointed herself project manager, creating detailed lists on purple construction paper and checking off tasks with the same determination she had shown throughout the investigation. She decided the lighthouse keeper's cottage needed a reading nook by the bay window, a vegetable garden in the south yard, and a treehouse in the old oak where her father had played as a boy. "Daddy always said he wanted to build me a treehouse," she explained, showing me a sketch she had drawn. "But he never had time because Mommy always made him work on her projects instead." I looked at her, drawing a simple platform with a rope ladder and a small roof, and made a decision. "We're going to build the best treehouse in Maine," I told her. "Your daddy would want that." Construction began the following weekend. Frank designed the structure using skills he swore he remembered from a case involving a carpenter who had hidden evidence in a client's addition. The irony was not lost on either of us. Molly supervised every nail and board, ensuring that the finished product matched her vision exactly. We added features Tom would have loved: a telescope mount for stargazing, a pulley system for hauling up snacks, and a small brass plaque that read "Tom's Treehouse, built with love." When we finished, Molly climbed up the ladder and sat on the platform, looking out at the lighthouse and the ocean beyond. "Daddy can see this from heaven," she said quietly. "He's smiling right now." I believed her. The legal matters took longer to resolve. Tom's estate had been tangled in Miriam's web of shell companies and fraudulent documents. But attorney Grace Chen, recommended by Agent Torres, proved as relentless as my brother in pursuing justice. She untangled every thread, recovered every stolen dollar, and ensured that the lighthouse property remained in the Callahan family where it belonged. The Florida beachfront house was seized and sold, the proceeds divided between Molly's trust fund and a victim compensation account. The shell company Beacon Holdings was dissolved, its assets liquidated. By the time Grace finished, Molly's future was secured with enough money for college, graduate school, and whatever dreams she chose to pursue. "Your son was careful," Grace told me during our final meeting. "The documentation he left behind made my job much easier. He protected his daughter even after death." Frank decided to stay in Maine. He sold his Detroit bungalow, shipped his belongings to Beacon Point, and moved into the Lighthouse cottage's spare bedroom. At 70 years old, he claimed he was too old to live alone and too stubborn to move to a retirement community. "Besides," he said, settling into the porch chair that had become his favorite. Molly giggled at that. She had started giggling again in the months since the trial, a sound I had feared I might never hear. The darkness that had shadowed her eyes was fading, replaced by something that looked almost like normal childhood joy. She still had nightmares sometimes. She still flinched at sudden sounds and asked too many questions about locked doors. But Sarah Whitmore, The child psychologist we visited every Thursday in Portland assured me these were normal responses to trauma and would fade with time and patience. Molly is remarkably resilient, Dr. Whitmore told me. She has a strong support system and a clear understanding that what happened was not her fault. Those are the foundations of healthy recovery. I enrolled Molly in Beacon Point Elementary, where she made friends with a girl named Emma, whose father was a lobsterman, and a boy named Lucas, whose mother ran the general store. She joined the art club, the science club, and to my delight, the Junior Lighthouse Preservation Society. Did you know the Fresnel lens in our lighthouse is one of only 73 remaining in the United States? She informed me one evening at dinner, reading from a pamphlet. We should give tours. I could be the guide, Frank laughed. A 10-year-old tour guide? I know more about this lighthouse than anyone except Grandpa, Molly said with absolute confidence. And Grandpa's knees hurt when he climbs all those stairs. She had a point. My knees did hurt, but watching her enthusiasm, her growing connection to the place her father had loved, I realized that the lighthouse's legacy would continue long after I was gone. The light would keep burning. Our family would make sure of it. We held the memorial on the anniversary of Tom's death. Exactly 2 years after the morning my son walked up those lighthouse stairs for the last time. The October sky was the same steel gray it had been that day, and the waves crashed against the rocks with the same fury. But this time, instead of grief and confusion, we gathered with purpose. I had debated for months about how to honor Tom properly. A gravestone seemed insufficient for a man who had given everything to protect his family. A plaque on a wall would be forgotten within a generation. I wanted something that would last as long as the lighthouse itself, something that would remind every visitor of the courage that had burned in my son's heart. The answer came from Molly, as the best answers often did. Daddy loved the lantern room, she said one evening, while we were sorting through boxes of his belongings. He used to take me up there at sunset and show me how the light worked. He said the lens was like a giant diamond that turned one small flame into something that could be seen for miles. She held up a photograph of Tom standing in the lantern room, his hand resting on the brass housing of the Fresnel lens, his smile wide and genuine. We should put something up there, she continued. Something that tells people about Daddy and why the light matters. And so the Thomas Eugene Callahan Memorial Gallery was born. We converted the small keeper's quarters at the base of the tower into a museum dedicated to the history of Beacon Point Lighthouse and the family that had kept it burning for 3 generations. Frank tracked down photographs from the Town Historical Society showing the lighthouse in various eras during the Great Hurricane of 1938, during World War II when it guided military vessels through the fog, during the automation transition, when I had fought to keep a human presence at the station. But the centerpiece of the gallery was Tom's story. I mounted his red journal in a glass display case, open to the page where he had written about his love for the lighthouse and his hopes for Molly's future. Beside it, we placed transcripts of his video recordings edited to remove the most disturbing content, but preserving his message about courage, family, and standing up against evil even when it seemed hopeless. A bronze plaque beside the display read, Thomas Eugene Callahan, 1978 to 2024. Beloved son, devoted father, keeper of the light. His courage saved those he loved and brought justice to those who betrayed him. The light burns on because he never stopped fighting. The dedication ceremony drew over 200 people from Beacon Point and the surrounding communities. They climbed the winding road to the lighthouse in a procession of cars and trucks, their headlights cutting through the autumn fog like smaller versions of our beacon. They brought flowers and candles and handwritten notes that they tucked into the memorial book we had placed at the gallery entrance. Louise Brennan spoke first, her leather notebook replaced by a laminated sheet of prepared remarks. Tom Callahan was the kind of neighbor everyone deserves but few are lucky enough to have, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. He shoveled my driveway without being asked. He fixed my fence after the nor'easter of 2022. He never passed my house without waving, without asking how I was doing, without making me feel like I mattered. She paused, looking out at the gathered crowd. When evil came to Beacon Point, Tom Callahan didn't run. He didn't hide. He documented everything, protected his daughter, and left behind the evidence that would eventually bring his killer to justice. That's not just courage. That's love in its purest form. Agent Torres spoke next, having traveled from Washington specifically for the ceremony. In my 15 years with the FBI, I have never encountered a victim who did more to solve his own murder than Thomas Callahan, she said. His meticulous documentation, his video recordings, his determination to protect his family even as he faced death, these things made our investigation possible. He was not just a victim, he was a partner in justice, working alongside us from beyond the grave. Frank took the podium after Torres, his gruff voice softening as he addressed the crowd. My nephew Tom used to call me every Sunday night without fail. We'd talk about the Lions game, about fishing, about Molly's latest accomplishment. He never missed a call in 12 years. Frank's voice cracked. I didn't realize until too late that those calls had stopped because he was too sick to dial the phone. I didn't realize my nephew was dying while I sat in Detroit complaining about the weather. He looked at me, and I saw the guilt we shared reflected in his eyes. But Tom forgave me, Frank continued. I know he did because of what he wrote in his journal. He said he didn't blame anyone except Miriam, that the people who loved him couldn't have known what was happening behind closed doors. That's the kind of man he was, generous even in death, forgiving even in betrayal. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the podium on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. 200 faces looked up at me, friends, neighbors, strangers who had heard Tom's story and wanted to pay their respects. But I spoke only to one face, the small, serious face in the front row clutching a purple flower. Tom, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. You were the best thing I ever did. Better than 50 years of keeping the light. Better than any storm I weathered or any ship I guided home. You were my purpose, my legacy, my reason for climbing those stairs every single day. I gripped the podium as tears blurred my vision. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening until it was too late. But I promise you, I promise on this lighthouse and everything it stands for, I will spend whatever time I have left making sure Molly knows how much you loved her. I will tell her your stories. I will keep your memory alive, and I will make sure the light never goes out. I looked up at the tower, at the beacon rotating steadily against the gray October sky. Rest now, son. We'll take it from here. On Molly's 11th birthday, I gave her something more valuable than any gift I could have wrapped in paper and ribbons. I gave her the truth about her inheritance, not the money in her trust fund or the lighthouse property that would one day be hers, but the legacy of courage and love that her father had left behind. We climbed the lighthouse stairs together that morning, taking our time on the 117 steps. My knees protested as they always did, but Molly held my hand and matched her pace to mine. Grandpa, she asked as we paused on the landing halfway up, why do we keep coming up here? The light is automatic now. You don't have to check it anymore. I smiled at her question, the same question I had asked myself every day since the Coast Guard installed the automated system 15 years ago. Because some things matter even when they're not required, I said. Your great-grandfather climbed these stairs every day for 40 years. I climbed them for 50. And one day, if you choose, you'll climb them too. Not because anyone makes you, but because you understand why it matters. We continued upward, past the windows that framed the Atlantic in rectangles of gray and blue, past the storage rooms where generations of keepers had stored their supplies, until we reached the lantern room at the top. The Fresnel lens dominated the space, its crystal prisms catching the morning light and scattering rainbows across the walls. I had seen this sight thousands of times, but it never failed to take my breath away. Beside me, Molly gasped the way she always did, her eyes wide with wonder. It's so beautiful, she whispered. Your father said the same thing the first time I brought him up here, I replied. He was about your age. He told me it looked like the inside of a diamond. Molly nodded. That's what he told me too. I led her to the small bench we had installed beneath the window. Tom's bench. We called it, and sat down beside her. From my jacket pocket, I withdrew an envelope that I had been carrying for months, waiting for the right moment. "Your father left this for you," I said, placing it in her hands. "We found it hidden in the lantern room, behind the same loose brick where he hid his journal. It was addressed to you, to be opened on your 11th birthday." Molly stared at the envelope, her name written in Tom's familiar handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. I did not read over her shoulder. This was between father and daughter, a conversation across the boundary of death that I had no right to witness. Instead, I watched her face, the way her eyes moved across the words, the way tears began to slip down her cheeks, the way her expression shifted from sorrow to something that looked almost like peace. When she finished, she carefully refolded the letter and held it against her heart. "He said he's proud of me," she whispered. "He said he knew I would be brave and that I would take care of you and Uncle Frank. He said." Her voice broke. "He said the lighthouse is mine now, that I'm the keeper. Even if no one else knows it." I put my arm around her and pulled her close. "Your father was right about everything, Molly. You are the keeper. You've been the keeper since the day you slipped that purple crayon note under the basement door." She leaned her head against my shoulder, clutching the letter like a treasure. "Daddy also wrote something else," she said after a long silence. "He said that our family has kept this lighthouse burning for over 100 years, and that the light isn't just about ships. He said the light represents something bigger. Truth in darkness, hope in storms, love that survives even when people try to destroy it." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "He said that's my inheritance. Not the money or the property, but the responsibility to keep that light burning in whatever way I choose." Molly looked up at me with eyes that seemed far older than 11. "He said I could be a doctor or a teacher or a scientist or anything I wanted, and I would still be a lighthouse keeper as long as I remembered what the light means." I thought about Margaret, who had understood the lighthouse better than anyone except Tom. I thought about my own father, who had taught me that keeping the light was more than a job, it was a calling. And I thought about Tom, who had passed that understanding to his daughter, even as he faced his own death. "Your father was the wisest man I ever knew," I said. "And you are exactly like him." Molly smiled through her tears, a real smile, the kind I had been waiting months to see. "Can we stay up here for a while, Grandpa? I want to watch the light." So we sat on Tom's bench as the morning fog rolled in from the Atlantic, watching the Fresnel lens rotate and the beam sweep across the gray water. We did not speak. We did not need to. We simply existed together in that sacred space. Grandfather and granddaughter, two lighthouse keepers honoring the legacy of those who had come before. When we finally descended the stairs, Molly walked with a new kind of confidence. She was no longer just a child, recovering from trauma. She was the inheritor of a tradition, the keeper of a flame that had burned for 177 years. That evening, as we celebrated her birthday with cake and candles and laughter, she made a wish before blowing out the flames. "What did you wish for?" Frank asked. Molly grinned. "I can't tell you, or it won't come true, but I'll give you a hint." She pointed toward the window, where the lighthouse beam swept across the darkening sky. "It has something to do with that." I knew then that the Callahan legacy was safe. The light would burn on. I am 76 years old now, and I have learned that time moves differently after you have faced death. 2 years have passed since Miriam's sentencing. 2 years since Frank moved into the spare bedroom and started complaining about Maine winters. 2 years since Molly began healing from wounds no child should ever have to bear. Some mornings I wake up and cannot believe we survived. Other mornings, I wake up and cannot believe Tom is still gone. But most mornings, I wake up to the smell of pancakes burning in the kitchen and the sound of Molly laughing at her uncle's attempts to cook breakfast. "Grandpa," she calls up the stairs, "Uncle Frank is ruining the eggs again." "I am not ruining them," Frank protests. "This is a Detroit specialty. Crispy edges build character." I smile as I pull on my robe and descend the stairs to join my family. This is what survival looks like, not dramatic victories or tearful reconciliations, but ordinary mornings filled with burnt eggs and laughter and the quiet miracle of being alive. Molly is 13 now, tall for her age, with her father's brown eyes and her grandmother Margaret's stubborn chin. She started 7th grade last fall and immediately joined the science club, the debate team, and the junior Coast Guard auxiliary. Her teachers say she is gifted. Her therapist says she is resilient. I say she is simply Tom's daughter, carrying his courage into a world that desperately needs it. She still climbs the Lighthouse stairs with me every Sunday morning. We sit on Tom's bench and watch the sunrise, and sometimes she reads aloud from her father's journal, the parts about hope and family and the meaning of keeping the light. She has memorized her favorite passages the way other children memorize song lyrics. The light isn't just for ships, she recited last Sunday, her voice steady and clear. The light is for anyone who has lost their way, anyone who needs to know that somewhere, someone is watching, someone cares, someone is keeping the flame burning through the darkest night. I listened to my son's words in my granddaughter's voice and felt something I had not felt since before the basement, before the poison, before Miriam destroyed everything I thought I knew about family. I felt peace. The Beacon Point Lighthouse has become something of a landmark since the trial. Tourists arrive every weekend to visit the Thomas Eugene Callahan Memorial Gallery, to climb the 117 stairs, to hear the story of the father who documented his own murder to protect his daughter. Molly gives tours sometimes, explaining the history of the Fresnel lens and the generations of Callahans who kept the light burning. My great-great-grandfather started here in 1892, she tells the visitors, her purple tour guide badge pinned to her jacket. My great-grandfather served for 40 years. My grandfather served for 50. And my father, she pauses here, every time, collecting herself before continuing. My father served until the day he died. He loved this lighthouse more than anything, except his family. The visitors always leave moved. Many of them sign the memorial book with messages of condolence and admiration. Some of them donate to the scholarship fund we established in Tom's name, supporting students who want to study marine biology or lighthouse preservation or criminal justice. One woman drove all the way from California after hearing our story on a podcast, just to shake Molly's hand and tell her she was the bravest person she had ever heard of. Frank has become a local celebrity in his own right. The retired Detroit homicide detective who helped crack the Beacon Point murder case is now a regular at the Harbor Cafe, holding court every morning with fishermen and tourists who want to hear his stories. He has softened in the years since moving here, trading his gruff exterior for something warmer, something that looks almost like contentment. Never thought I'd retire to a lighthouse in Maine, he told me last week, watching the sunset from our porch. Never thought I'd spend my golden years babysitting a teenager and arguing with my brother about whose turn it is to do dishes. Any regrets? I asked. He shook his head slowly. Not one. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Louise Brennan passed away last spring, peacefully in her sleep, at the age of 74. We scattered her ashes in the garden she had helped us plant, and Molly placed a small stone marker near the roses. Louise Brennan. It reads, neighbor, witness, friend. She saw the truth when others looked away. Her leather notebook is now part of our memorial gallery, displayed alongside Tom's journal as evidence of the ordinary courage that can exist in ordinary people. I think about legacy often these days, not in the abstract way young people think about it, as something distant and theoretical, but in the concrete way of a man who knows his time is limited. What will I leave behind? What will people remember when Eugene Callahan is gone? The answer, I have realized, is not the lighthouse. Lighthouses can be automated, can be abandoned, can crumble into the sea. The answer is not the money or the property or even the memorial gallery with its bronze plaques and glass display cases. The answer is Molly. She is my legacy, mine and Tom's and Margaret's, and every Callahan who climbed these stairs before us. She carries our stories in her heart, our courage in her bones, our love in every breath she takes. As long as she lives, as long as she remembers, As long as she passes these stories to her own children someday, the light will never truly go out. Last night, I climbed the lighthouse stairs alone. My knees screamed in protest, and I had to stop 3 times to catch my breath, but I made it to the top. I stood in the lantern room as the sun set over the Atlantic, watching the Fresnel lens begin its eternal rotation, and I spoke to my son for the first time since his funeral. "I kept my promise, Tom," I said to the empty room. "I took care of Molly. I kept the light burning. I made sure your story was told." The beam swept across the darkening water, reaching out toward ships I could not see, toward sailors I would never meet, toward everyone who has ever been lost and needed a light to guide them home. "Rest now, son. We'll be okay." And as the stars emerged one by one above Beacon Point, I realized that I meant it. We would be okay. The light burns on.